Anthony Scaramucci has had a long career as an investor with Skybridge Capital. He is in the conference business too. Skybridge Alternatives Conference, or known as SALT, one of the most amazing, gigantic financial events of the world since 2009, on hiatus like all physical events are at the moment. He is here because he served as White House Communications Director briefly in 2017 and has an amazing journey with Donald Trump. So we're here to talk about Donald Trump today, and I want to hear him talk about his journey. But he's supported Democrats in the past, and his trajectory as a political participant is fascinating. But he's been involved with a lot of the great leaders of our country. So Michael, he's a journalist, which of course makes me feel good about him, and he's a friend. He was a columnist at New York Magazine, at Vanity Fair. He won 2 National Magazine Awards. He's written 7 books. Notably, he wrote Fire and Fury, which was a New York Times #1 bestseller, published in January 2018, about the Trump White House. Later, he wrote a sequel, Siege, Trump Under Fire, that came out in June of 2019. He also wrote a book, which we may touch on briefly, The Man Who Owns the News, a profile of Rupert Murdoch, in 2008. So both of these guys know a lot about politics, Washington, and particularly Donald Trump. So I'm going to start, Anthony, with you, and thank you so much for being here. Could you just talk about your trajectory from being a Trump supporter and really part of the Trump transition, went to Davos representing him, went into the White House, and now you've become a scathing critic. Explain that whole chain of events briefly, if you would.
Look, it's not personal to the president. You know, my criticism is really born from what he's doing and what he's doing to potentially demolish the institutions of our democracy. So I've had my piece. The American people have spoken. You know, it's a little shocking what the president's doing now in terms of trying to further corrupt the system and sow seeds of distrust in the system. But, you know, at the end of the day, for me, I was the garden variety Republican, and I was the garden variety Republican fundraiser. And in some ways, I'm an accidental participant because none of us thought that the president was going to win. You could read the first chapter of Michael's book. Michael's book started out well. When it got to me, I didn't like it as much as the earlier chapters of Michael's book. But what I would say is none of us thought he was going to win. And so he accidentally won. When he asked me to serve, I think that was my pride and ego speaking, and I was overly tempted by that. Obviously, I made a mistake inside the White House. And frankly, you know, if guys like Steve Bannon and Rice Priebus were just more upfront with me and you know, they didn't want me anywhere near the White House, if they just said that to me up front, it would have caused me to recalculate my decision making. But that's Washington. That's the way things work. I got an 11-day PhD in the shenanigans of Washington. But I want to point out to everybody that I stayed loyal to the president. You know, I got fired. I did something fireable, made a mistake with a reporter. I said something about Steve Bannon, which I actually thought was funny. We can talk about Steve if you want. I have my opinions of him. But you know, I got fired. I deserve to be fired. I'm accountable for that firing. And frankly, I tried to stay loyal to the president and to the Republican agenda after my departure. But frankly, it became impossible. And at some point, you have to ask yourself where your personal integrity and your patriotism lives over partisanship. And so that's really, you know, my journey. Last time I saw Mr. Wolff, we were on stage together at hstreet.com seminar. It was at the start of the administration, actually. And the other thing I would say to Michael before we get this thing started, I wish that he would have at least called me on his 2 books that he wrote, because the books were, in my opinion, in certain areas, somewhat one-sided. His sourcing was from one side. And as we know, people, you know, I've been through a divorce. I don't know if you guys have, but my divorce lawyer had a great line. People have a tendency to remember things the way they need to, not necessarily the way they happened. And so, you know, there's my side, there's his side or her side, and then there's somewhere in the middle is the truth, you know. And I do think some of the things that Michael wrote in the book could have been better characterized more objectively.
But just
You
quickly,
mean some of the things that I wrote about you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could have called me and you could have said, this is what's being said about you. And
No. And what about the things that I said about other people? How would you characterize them?
uh, in fairness, some of it was exaggerated, Michael. You know, I don't have the book in front of me right now. I did read both of your books. Some of it was exaggerated. It felt like you were getting a heavy feed from Steve Bannon on a lot of those people. And so what he was doing was he was providing caricature to those people as opposed to three dimensions, you know, and it was more or less a one-sided account of some of those people. The first chapter of your book, Fire and Fury, where there's a discussion with Roger Ailes and the suggestion that Trump did not want to win, you know, I can tell you for certain that that's not the case. He didn't think he was going to win. And I don't think Steve Bannon thought he was going to win. I didn't think he was going to win. I can take you to 6 o'clock the evening of the election, where none of us, including Mr. Trump, thought he was going to win. But he was certainly
were you
campaigning.
with him then, Anthony?
I'm sorry?
Were you with him on the election day?
I
election
was
night?
with him. Yeah, absolutely. I did 2.5 hours of Facebook Live for him and then went upstairs to the 26th floor. And remember, I was hosting a show for Fox News at the time. And at 6:15, I was in the brand new studio on 6th Avenue with all of the anchors, which would have included Megyn Kelly at that time and Bill O'Reilly. And there was a gentleman by the name of Chris Stirewalt that was handing out a memo from Fox News that was calling the election for Secretary Clinton at 10:30 on the evening of November the 8th. And so basically, you know, I called Jared at that point and I said, listen, let me take a picture of this memo. You know, please let Mr. Trump know what Fox is preparing. And they sort of were conditioned for that. Now, by the way, I did get copies of that memo signed by Mr. Trump for people like Bill Shine and some of the executives of Fox, because it was sort of a Dewey defeat Truman sort of a memo. But, you know, he was working hard enough, and Michael may remember this. We were in New Hampshire 48 hours before the polling opened on November the 8th, and we flew from New Hampshire to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and landed in Grand Rapids, Michigan at 1 a.m. in the morning. So, you know, if he wasn't playing to win, I don't think he would have necessarily done that. He was trying to leave it on the field. Not saying that he thought he was going to win, but I thought he was playing to win. So I thought that that was an exaggerated account by.
But well, let me just dive in here and just to sort of challenge the whole reference of cause and effect here. It's impossible, and I think most of us, the entire world actually now know this, to actually say what Donald Trump was thinking at any given time. Because what he's thinking at this time versus what he's thinking 2 minutes from now is highly variable and often completely divergent. You know, again, we're back to talking about, you know, Anthony is talking about Donald Trump as though he were a normal political figure and a reasonably balanced man and human being. And that's what we know that is not true. We've all seen this. We've all gone through this. There isn't any logic here. There isn't any foundation here. It's part caprice, part whatever is in the water at a given moment. You know, you know, I mean, ultimately, the experience that I had in writing this you know, certainly the first book about this administration was to see it up close and to say, oh, you know, oh my God, here the basic language in which we traditionally talk about politics doesn't apply here, can't apply here. What we have, and you know, my fundamental contribution, I think, to this historic era was to say, holy God, the president is a fruitcake. That's very hard to bring a political analysis to.
Yeah, quickly, we have a poll we wanted to ask that I forgot to put up. So let's just put it up real quickly and we're going to continue as people fill it out. Um, but Kendall, please, if you would put it up. Thank you. All right. So go ahead and answer those questions when you can. But Anthony, what was the tipping point? I mean, this picks up a little bit on what Michael said, and I also want to ask Michael a question following this. But what was the tipping point with you from going out of the White House, even feeling probably very complex feelings? You felt you made a mistake, but you still were loyal. What was it? Was it a series of things? Was it one particular thing that put you over the edge to say, wait a minute, this is just plain wrong?
Well, I should have gone over the edge sooner if I'm going to be reflective and characterize myself honestly. I think my shortcomings are that I should have gone over the edge sooner. But I want to pick up on something that Michael's saying about the president being a fruitcake. One of the regrets that I have, and I think some people that are really being honest about it, is we were trying to normalize him. And so what happens is he's winning the presidency. He's now going to sit in the office of the presidency. He's the successor of people like Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt. And so we learn in social studies to revere these people. And he's in obviously, or arguably, the most powerful position in the world. So we start to normalize the person. The other thing that I did, which I regret, and it's uncomfortable for me to talk about, but I want to be honest about it, is I allowed my ego and my pride to get in the way. Had I had looked at it more objectively, I would have said what Michael just said, wow, this guy's a fruitcake. I can't go work for him. But I didn't do that. I hit the cognitive override switch. I was tempted by the forces of my own ego, by my own pride, frankly, by my self-narrative. I grew up in a blue-collar family. I had risen to some level of success and lived a good part of the American dream. And this sort of self-narrative that I'd had the opportunity to work for the American president was too tempting for me. So I have to own that mistake. I have to own that mistake for the rest of my life.
Let me add something here that
kudos to you for the candor on that. By the way.
I'm just talking to you. I think it's beneficial to your conference that we talk very openly, very honestly about these things.
The Anthony Scaramucci experience, more expressive than some others, but is not dissimilar. Virtually everyone that came into this administration, first thing, came in with many of the same motivations that Anthony just described, and has had the same reaction. And it's a reaction of a combination of confusion, horror, shame, and a real inability to know what to do. When you work for the president of the United States and then you come to recognize that he is not only unfit for this job, but in a way that we have that there is no precedent for. Anthony, and again, yes, to his absolute credit, has come out now and said this, but it is the exact thing. And I have gone through conversation, off the record conversation after off the record conversation. It is the exact thing which most everyone, and I'm talking almost everyone except a very, very narrow circle that it remains around the president, feels in having had this experience of being close to Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, I think you can say the closer you have been to Donald Trump, the more horrified you are by Donald Trump.
Well, actually, there's a great question from the audience here that I'd love you both to address, which I think I know what you're going to say. What insights of kindness or empathy were you able to recognize or experience with Donald Trump? Were there any? Is there something you see when you get with this guy? Oh, he's actually got this nice side that most people don't see. Did either of you have that experience?
There's one slight. I will give, having written about the at length about the negative, I will give you the one positive, which is when you first start to spend time with Donald Trump, he's actually pretty funny. And you kind of go, okay, you know, the guy is having a good time here. You know, it's an interesting kind of banter. You know, sometimes he actually hits the nail on the head about the weaknesses of other people, which seems funny until you recognize that it's its own pathology. But even that,
perhaps.
yes, even that passes very soon. So as soon as he is kind of not trying to impress you, then he, well, depresses you.
Anthony, is there any kindness there that you encountered?
Well, you know, listen, I gave a very long interview to PBS Frontline, and so I don't want to go into the details of it. I'll just be brief and say that don't forget that he's a human being, because what happens to us is we sometimes demonize these figures that are sociopathic or fruitcake, as Michael is saying, and I don't want to ever do that, because once you do that, then you say, okay, well, that will never happen again. You know, when we demonize people, we think, okay, but there's more complexity to this guy. And weirdly, I wouldn't describe it as niceness, but there's a sadness there. There's a level of self-loathing and a level of insecurity there. And, you know, you don't have time for the conversation, but I was in the Oval Office with him on the Monday. And remember, I was only there for 2 Mondays, so I remember almost everything, okay? And I was in the Oval Office with him. We walked into the study, and I had an idea for him. And I was explaining the idea to him. And the fact that he hadn't thought of that idea put him extremely on the defensive with me. And then he started to excoriate the idea. And I said, okay, that is non-executive function. Okay, because a good executive, okay, would, okay, explore the idea, workshop it with you, maybe even bring other people into the room to talk about it. But what you found with him is that he was reflexively against anything that you would come up with. And so an hour later, you know, HR would probably be mad at me for bringing this up, but an hour later, I was back in the study with HR McMaster, who's a personal friend of mine. You know, I had met him years ago and we had a lot of mutual friends. And so there we were, and HR was bringing something up. He did the exact same thing to HR. And, you know, I'm limitedly skilled when it comes to politics, but I've built 2 reasonably successful businesses. And, you know, I've been capable in my career, rightly or wrongly, of having a pretty good evaluation of talent. And what I missed about President Trump as a candidate was he didn't have that executive skill function. And so after I got fired, and again, I blame myself for the firing, and in a weird way, it was a miracle, probably saved my marriage and my career and did so many other things for me, as well as it being humbling. When I left, my reaction to it is, wow, we're in for a whole lot of trouble because he doesn't have this executive function. Last point, it's October of 2019. There are 2 senior, well-known cabinet officials, perhaps people that Michael has actually interviewed, sitting on the couch in my office at Skybridge. It's October of 2019. And they say to me, well, the president can't manage anything. And so if we go into a crisis, we don't have a coordination. We don't have Richard Neustat's model of a cabinet model or a White House model to run the executive branch. And so it's literally like he's a cue ball shooting into billiards in the morning, and everybody is now paralyzed with fear. They don't want to be humiliated by tweet or fired on Twitter. And so no one's doing anything. And unfortunately, the executive branch requires integration and some level of symphony. And so if we get a crisis, the executive branch is going to misfire and not handle the crisis. And by the way, I thought that was going to be the Soleimani strike, which was January of 2020. It feels like 100 years ago now, but it ultimately was the COVID-19 crisis.
Somebody in the audience, or Esther Dyson actually asks, did he ever talk about his childhood? Because he seems to her to be a classic victim of child abuse. And I think that's what his niece probably wrote, more or less.
Never with me. I don't know if he did with Michael, but never
with me. Never, I can guarantee, with anybody.
Yeah. because you asked a lot of people what he said to them too. Let's quickly share this poll just for what it's worth. Okay, there, in 2 years, I had to include he might still be president in fairness, not that I expect that or hope that. Fighting numerous lawsuits and indictments is the most likely guess of this crowd by far. Between now and January, okay, what's going to happen between now and January 20th? And I'd love to kind of segue to that in the conversation. Create more havoc than any ever before. A large number of you think that. Pardon scores, yes, that will, and do everything possible to stymie the incoming administration. Okay, so does that ring true to you guys? What do you think is going to happen? I mean, we aren't finished here. We are still actually in a surprisingly disturbing phase, despite the fact that we have seen a relatively definitive repudiation of his leadership. What happens next?
I think the Donald Trump show continues, and I think that one of the things that we're going to see, and it's confusing and disturbing, is that Donald Trump does not have to be the president of the United States to be Donald Trump. And I think that this is what's going on now is a setup to what will roll out over the next year or two or three, which is Donald Trump trying to compete with the real president of the United States for headlines, which he may be able to successfully do. And he will go on to feed his incredible need for attention. And he's good at this, so he will do this successfully. I assume that he will hit every stadium, every red state stadium that will that he can hit over the next extended period of time. And yes, and I assume there'll be some substantial media play here too.
Anthony, do you worry about that he's going to do further damage to society from here?
Well, there's during the period of time that he's in the White House, yes. Him out of the White House, I'll take the other side of what Michael's saying. I think this is a humiliating loss for him. And I think the notion that people are going to show up in the size with the level of spectacle upon his departure will scare him, meaning they may not be at the size that he would need to feed his ego. And it could be a Tulsa, Oklahoma moment where he's being told by his team that there's going to be 100,000 people and a crammed 20,000 person arena, and only 6,000 people show up. And of course, Herman Cain did, unfortunately for him and tragically for him. And so I think that may slow him down more than what Michael's suggesting because of all the humiliation. Okay. However, if he's capable of bringing the crowds, then I do believe Michael will be right. That will feed exactly into where he is. And so this is not me being cynical. This is just me being observant. You have 10 or 12 people that look in the mirror in the Republican Party that are a decade to 2 decades, and in some cases 3 decades younger than Mr. Trump, and they see a president in the mirror. And so they will begin the process on January 21st. They've been, if John Kennedy were alive right now, they would all be profiles in cowardice in terms of them shaking in their boots at Mr. Trump's Wizard of Oz-like nonsense. But on January 21st, I think they're going to work almost together to undermine him as a result of their ambition. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I will say this, a couple of threads come unwound from the Trump mirage, the Trump facade. That thing could unravel in a way where you don't hear from him. And I'll leave you with this one last thought. He gave a tell about 6 weeks ago. He said, well, if I lose to this guy, you may never hear from me again. You may never see me again. Yeah. And so I don't think he's 100% sure yet. It's sort of like a focus group test right now.
I assume that, as with all things with Donald Trump, he means the opposite of what he says. So if he says you may never see me again, what he really means is that you will actually see even more of me. And I just think that that's what he has to do. There isn't a Donald Trump that could go off and lick his wounds and go off and evaluate the experience that he's had. There's only one Donald Trump, and it's a Donald Trump. It is a man who wholly exists in public. Actually, he doesn't exist.
Do you mind,
when he's
David?
not
Let me
in
ask
public.
Michael something. So, Michael, what if these crowd sizes are diminished, and what if it's like an aging rock star that can't fill the arena? Do you think he'll still be on the road trying to create those performances?
I think he will look to create ever more conflict, which is the kind of thing that fills those stadiums, and it is the kind of thing that has, for some mysterious reason, motivated the 74 million people who voted for him.
Michael, this is the interesting thing is you have changed your tune on this, because when you were with us last time, you did think there was a possibility he could basically slink away. But it's the 74 people,
I actually
it's the
thought
74 million that have changed your thinking, right?
Totally. I mean, I was completely wrong about this election, because I thought that he would be destroyed by it. That his base would significantly desert him, that they would have, in 2016, they didn't really know who he was. By 2020, they surely knew who he was. And I said to myself, they surely, now knowing who he was, we're not going to make the same mistake again. So I was completely wrong about this. And I think that the headline from this election is actually not that Donald Trump lost, but that he managed to hold on to virtually everyone who voted for him in 2016, and then add a significant number to that. So I think that's what we're going into the post-election world with. That's the fact that he is that he commands the loyalty of these people for reasons that I don't think any of us can explain.
Well, also, let's talk about the dovetailing of this all with some conspiracy theories. I mean, this amazing fact that he's raised 170 million since the election, based on this conspiracy theory that it was stolen from him, and these truly crazy, wacko stories about, Maduro and, all kinds of, we know what these stories are. Is there any way to combat that? One of the very good questions in the chat was, how do we help those who still believe in Trump and feel the election was rigged better see the light? I mean, I think all of us who feel we live in a fact-based world ask ourselves this several times a day. It's hard not to, right? I mean, either one of you jump in.
Well, I mean, I think it's not as if that that this story has been hidden. It's not as if people haven't had literally every opportunity to evaluate Donald Trump and to make a reasoned decision about who he is. They've had that opportunity, and they have either declined to take it, or they have proactively decided that it's wrong. So I think we're well beyond that point. That a vast majority of these 74 million people have made a really considered proactive decision that Donald Trump's truth is their truth.
Anthony, I'm sure you've given a lot of thought to this issue of the followers. What's your thinking about it?
Well, listen, these followers are the people I grew up with. Some of them are, frankly, my family members. Some of them live in that category that he could shoot people on Fifth Avenue, but it's really less about Mr. Trump. It's more about them, and so ultimately, I could be wrong about this, but there's a signal and a noise from those voters. Trump is hearing the signal that 74 million people love him and they love Trumpism. I'm not hearing that. What I'm hearing is classic economic divide, classic economic anxiety. I'm hearing from my family members that live in the blue collar world that there's economic anxiety and economic desperation, a result of which he represents the anti-establishment. Even though he was president, even though he was born with a golden spoon in his mouth, to them, he represents a finger in the eye of people on Wall Street. That would include me, journalists, that would include the two of you, and other elites. And so a result of which they're angry, and that is a protest vote. And it says more about themselves. And I'll make a prediction. And I've said this to people on the vice president's team, now the president's elect team. If they can come up with policies that can help those people, that anger will dissipate. And once that anger dissipates, people will look back on Trumpism and say, okay, why do I need to be like that? Why do I need to be that angry? You know, what I have found about anger in life, very few people can sustain anger like Mr. Trump and sustain it as permanently. Most people are able to move on and leave it behind. And so the challenge right now, there'll be two challenges. One, can the Biden administration knit a coalition that will put forth policies that will help those people and allow for that anger to dissipate? And then secondarily, what will the aftermath of Trumpism mean for the Republican Party? Will it be what I think Michael has observed, and he's appropriately written about, is that Mr. Trump is not fact-based. Mr. Trump's mendacity has now been picked up by his acolytes, whether it's Tom, whose middle name is Shut Up and Start Picking the Cotton, or a guy like Marco Rubio, or you pick some of these people. They've learned something from Mr. Trump, that truth does not matter, facts do not matter, and they can live in this lurking world of great cynicism. And so we'll have to see if there could be a restoration of the Republican Party. I'm pessimistic about it, frankly, but that party is now unmoored. It's become a personality cult, and there'll be a fight for who the next personality is, who could possibly be more Trumpy or Trumpier than Mr. Trump.
You know, I'd just push this a little, because I still think this is being we're talking about this in fairly traditional political terms. And in fairly traditional political terms, I totally agree with the analysis. But if it's not that, if something else has happened here of a truly unique nature, then I think you have to look at it in different ways. And I would suggest that that Donald Trump is not now and has never been a politician, that what he is a performer. And he's a brilliant performer. And like any performer, he will do whatever he has to do to keep the attention of his audience. So we're really looking at not the political world, but some other world in which you know, we just don't know that the resources that Donald Trump brings to his next chapter in this strange story.
But the thing, I do believe there's a landscape shifting reality, which is the role of social media personally, and which is why you see very similar phenomena in India, Turkey, Poland, Hungary, Brazil, Philippines, to some extent to UK. I mean, these forces that he has really brilliantly and somewhat naturally manipulated are manipulable by new tools of modern society. But we've got to wrap momentarily. I wanted to, since I sort of made a media point just now, you know, Michael, one of the things that you also bring to the table is a deep familiarity with Rupert Murdoch and Fox News. And there's an interesting dynamic there right now. I'd love you to just comment on what's going on with the Fox-Trump relationship, in your opinion.
Well, I think it's a complicated one. Rupert Murdoch has never liked Donald Trump. Actually, beyond that, only scorn and distaste for the man, which he had to swallow when Donald Trump was president, but which he doesn't have to now. At the same time, while that Rupert Murdoch may not like Donald Trump, Rupert Murdoch has never said no to any dollar available to him. So, that puts him in this rock and a hard place position, because he's not going to turn down if Trump still remains the motor of the Fox audience. Then, then he's not going to turn off that motor.
So is he just hedging his bets with allowing, I don't know.
He doesn't
how
know.
much he's allowing.
I mean, I'm sure he doesn't know at this time. I'm sure he's trying to figure out which direction. There are other forces going on here. He's dealing with his children, who certainly have no love for Donald Trump and no love for Fox News. Plus, he's probably dealing with a medium-term goal of getting rid of Fox News. All of the only assets that Fox has left are the assets that Disney would not take. That's not a Murdoch recipe for building a company or even being in business. So
Okay.
I think that there's an end game there.
Okay, well, thank you. And, we do have to wrap. Anthony, on another occasion, I'd love to really have a longer conversation with you about the future of the Republican Party, which you touched on there. You must feel very frustrated as a Republican
Well,
about that.
I'll leave you with one thought. There's people like me that are no longer with a party. We're men or women without party as a result of what's happened. And so we'll have to see how it unfolds. I'm not optimistic about it though, David.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like either of you are terribly optimistic about the near term. But thank you both for joining. Thank you.
Meanwhile,
also for
if I
joining
could just
together.
add, Anthony, I would love to have lunch when we can go back to having lunch sometime.
Well, you got it. You have my coordinates.
I do.
Anytime, Michael.
I can provide them if either of you don't. And thank you really both for doing it together, because I know that was, maybe a little bit edgy, and you both were very gracious.
It wasn't for me.
It wasn't for him either.
Nor me.
I
You
said
both were really nice
piece.
about it.
My issue with Michael was, hey, if you're going to write about me, that's great, but you're a journalist. Be objective. Pick up the phone and call me. At least hear my point of view.
Well, thank you for directly addressing that head on at the very beginning. So thank you both. I'm going to bring Josh back on. We're going to thank everybody, but this was a great discussion, a really important discussion. And thank you both for joining it. And
Michael, nice to see you again, Michael.
Absolutely.
All right. Be well.
Thank you both.